Please join me in welcoming Mr. Michael Medved.
Thank you for seeing that new trailer for the American Miracle. And I'm able to let you know here, this is something that will be uncontroversial. And it's something involving Kennedy Center, which is uncontroversial. Okay, the grand black tie special premiere for American Miracle is scheduled for June 4th at the Kennedy Center. And so we are doing that, and any of you who can make it, well, the Guthrie Theater is a little bit more convenient and maybe a little bit less grandiose. But I wanted to pick up on what was a wonderful presentation by my friend Paul Kengor, who's featured in the film. He is one of the featured scholars in American history and values who comment on the activity that is dramatized in the film. But one of the things that he talked about was how Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which is a subject that we're concentrating on today, how it won 11 Oscar nominations. Okay, most of those Oscar nominations it didn't win, as Paul indicated. They were won by Gone with the Wind, because you had the most remarkable collection of movies in 1939, which is often referred to, you know how we're about to go into a golden era? The golden era of motion pictures clearly was 1939, 1940, 1941. Casablanca won the Academy Award in 43. But with all of that going on, this just gives you a sense of the major Oscar nominees in 1939 in the United States. With the most nominations, Gone with the Wind, then Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, then Wuthering Heights, then Goodbye, Mr. Chips, then one of the greatest movies ever made, Stagecoach, with John Wayne and John Ford movie, The Wizard of Oz, The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex with Errol Flynn and Bette Davis, Ninotchka with Greta Garbo, Of Mice and Men, Beau Geste, Gulliver's Travels, Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's a pretty star-flecked array. Now I want to share another list with you and see if you recognize this list. Anora, The Brutalist, A Complete Unknown, Conclave, Dune Part 2, Amelia Perez, I'm Still Here, Nickel Boys, The Substance, and Wicked. Now, of those films, I'm sure you've heard of Wicked. There are people here, right, who haven't heard of any of the other films? Right. Those were the films nominated for Best Picture. Okay, so what happened to the Motion Picture Academy? What happened to the movie industry? What happened to American culture between 1939, when the country was still recovering from depression, when we had tremendous problems in the world at large? I mean, you talk about the problems of facing Soviet Russia, Stalin's Russia, and Hitler's Germany, and Mussolini's Italy, and Tojo's Japan, and all of this going on, and yet the movie industry was producing some of the greatest work ever. And today in the United States, when we are vastly more comfortable, and basically, when most people look at what they have and you look at the resources available to the movie industry, what happened? Why do we come from movies that feature, because some of these movies, as a film critic, I've actually seen, and I feel like I'm the only one in the country to see them. Amelia Perez, which had the most nominations of any movie for the recent Oscars. How many people here have seen Amelia Perez? Okay, do you know what it's about? It's in Spanish, And it's a French film, makes perfect sense. And it's about a drug lord who's part of a Mexican cartel, murderous, mean, evil guy, and he has one desire, which is to become a woman. And so in the movie, a large part of the movie, which is, yes, also a musical, it is a musical. He has to go to Israel to get a gender reassignment surgery, which is not so easy to get in Israel, frankly. But it's completely batty. And the fact is, it's nominated for Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Director. It really was acclaimed. What is going on here? At the box office, they had to subpoena people to go see the movie. And so, no, I am not recommending it. American Miracle is better and very different. What I want to speak about just a little bit is what we need to go back to the Hollywood of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and to replace the Hollywood of Amelia Perez, or nearly all of the other films on the Best Pictures list. And what I would suggest is there are three things that help to explain the tremendous success of Frank Capra and the tremendous contribution he made to American culture. And I agree with President Trump, by the way, that when they do this Garden of Heroes, which they are going to do, the president's determined to do it, that they include Frank Capra with those other statues and other memorials. That's very appropriate. The three things that people need to do is reaching out for things that unite people and don't divide them and don't put them in separate enclaves. And the second thing that people need to do is to do things that get people to look up, not down, to actually inspire and uplift and not depress and shock. And the third point is building something that has a chance of lasting, because that goes to the very essence of the problem. The problem about building things that are not going to divide people, that are actually going to enable to unite people and bring them together. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington is a very good example of that. Does anybody know what state Mr. Smith represents? In the movie. It's never mentioned. They were very careful about that because they did not want this to be a political issue when it was released. It's also, different people have written different scholarly works on whether Jefferson Smith was actually a Republican or a Democrat, because there's no hint in the movie. There really is no hint in the movie, no comments about Roosevelt, who had been president already for a long time. They scrupulously avoided this because Frank Capra wanted this to be a movie for every American that brought Americans together, and not sort of isolating us into these different silos of based upon your political approach. And it's what's particularly disturbing right now, and I think damaging to our country, is that even within both major parties, there is no unanimity, there is no unity, there is no teamwork, really. Both parties, particularly the Democratic Party, of course, are terribly divided right now. And it's a very divided country. And one of the things that is necessary is going forward with other projects like Mr. Smith, which appeal to goodness and kindness, and make a very, very different kind of approach than what we see today. Capra wrote in 1934, this is at the time that he was doing his first Oscar-winning Best Picture, and he had four of them. Four of them counting Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, 3 others. But he had done It Happened One Night. And what he says, my films must let every man, woman, and child know that God loves them, that I love them, and that peace and salvation will become a reality only when they all learn to love each other. And then he also wrote that a friend of his had told him, the talents you have, Mr. Capra, are not your own, not self-acquired. God gave you those talents. They are his gifts to you to use for his purpose. And one of the purposes that is desperately needed in America today is to bridge the gaps that exist and seem to be exacerbated by every new issue and every new event, and trying to approach people in a way that avoids separation and polarization and partisanship. Okay, the second point that has to do with uplift rather than basically shocking people. Capra died in 1991, and he lived a very long and wonderful life. And toward the end of his life, he didn't make any more movies. And he had about 20 years between the time he did his last work. And his last work, by the way, was a series of films he did for television for the Bell system, which were among my favorite films as a little kid. He did a film in 1956 called Our Mr. Sun, which introduced the sun and facts about the sun. Is marvelous. And it's joyous and it's positive. But he wanted to do that kind of film and to stay away from films that he described in his autobiography this way, because he, again, writing in 1971, he wrote, "The winds of change blew through the dream factories of make-believe, tore at its crinoline tatters, the hedonists, the homosexuals, the hemophiliac bleeding hearts, the God-haters, the quick-buck artists who substituted shock for talent, all cried, 'Shake 'em, rattle 'em, God is dead, long live pleasure, nudity, yeah, wife-swapping, yeah, liberate the world from prudery, emancipate our films from morality, kill for thrill, shock, shock, to hell with the good in man, dredge up his evil, shock, shock.'" And then he added that, in his opinion, practically all the Hollywood filmmaking of today is stooping to cheap, salacious pornography in a crazy bastardization of a great art to compete for the patronage of, you'll pardon me, deviants and masturbators. Okay, so yes, Frank, tell us how you really feel. By the way, one of the things I found out preparing for speaking to you today is that Capra's name. Do you know what Capra means in Italian? It's goat, as in greatest of all time. But in any event, for us to move into the area where you are going to actually uplift people, there are little stirrings of that in Hollywood recently. There was an interview recently with John Irwin, who is one of the people who, from a deeply committed Christian point of view, has been turning out material like he is behind this current series, which just got renewed for a third year, House of David, which many of you may have seen. And he did an interview with Barton Swaim of the Wall Street Journal, and he said, "There is a longing now for content that, as I like to say, restores faith in things worth believing in, things that you can watch with your kids or with your parents. If you think about that TV screen when it first came out, it was something that gathered everybody around it. I Love Lucy, Andy Griffith, Carol Burnett. It gave multiple generations a common experience, and typically the common experience left you feeling you could aspire to be a better version of yourself." And again, for films that try to do that, for a country that tries to do that, in our educational system, which we had excellent presentations about earlier today, to allow people to aspire, to encourage them to aspire to a better version of themselves, that's important too. And then the third point that I wanted to make has to do with this idea of building something to last, something that is going to be worth seeing 50 years, 100 years after the fact. I mean, it's the greatest music ever made. Johann Sebastian Bach died in 1650, right? And, pardon me, he died in 1750. He was born in 1685. It's still an incredibly long time ago. And the idea that today we are some 80 years after Mr. Smith Comes to Washington came out, we are still looking at it and learning from it and being uplifted by it and feeling something by it. It has to do with the aspiration of so many of these Golden Age Hollywood directors. It wasn't a mistake that you had Wizard of Oz and Stagecoach and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington all in the same year, because that was a year where the world was closing in. World War II was about to begin, and people were concerned about building something of lasting value. There are so few films or TV programs that anyone can assume are going to be watched even 5 years from now. I mean, if you look at the Oscar list that I just shared with you, where nobody had seen the films, of course. The Brutalist, by the way, is a very ambitious film. It's 3 hours and 45 minutes long. And they do allow an intermission in between. In any event, the point is that none of these films that are of the 10 nominated for Best Picture, none of them has a chance of being the subject of a meeting like the one we're having here to celebrate Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, because the appeal is ephemeral. It goes away. It's for the moment. And what we need, and it's something we need in our politics, it's something we need in our pop culture, it's something we need specifically in the movie business, is again, doing things that are actually going to bring people together rather than driving them apart, rather than separating them. Number two, to uplift people rather than looking at the shock value that horrifies them. And number three, having a chance of lasting value and lasting impact. And I wanted to conclude by talking about something with immediate impact for me. For Jewish people, this is the Passover season. And Passover begins formally on Saturday night. This coming Saturday night, that will be the time for the first Seder. And there are 3 elements of the Passover message that correspond to the 3 elements that I'm trying to give you here, and I do hope we'll have a chance for some questions. But on the first element, the idea of bringing people together, a Seder, which you've heard, which is a festive ritual dinner that is held by Jewish people who are religiously committed at all. One of the things it says that he who is hungry, come and eat with us. There's the idea of large groups of people, and my mother, may she rest in peace, used to have, I think she had her record, she had 90 people one year for a Passover Seder. Seder means order, and you go through a ritual and you are meant to actually experience the Exodus again. And when it comes to uplift, the Passover story isn't just the story of the plagues in Egypt and being released. It's also the story of escaping through the Red Sea, through the miracle of the Red Sea. And it's a story that continues as the Jewish people approach Mount Sinai, which is exactly 50 days after Passover when that's observed. Christians call it Pentecost. It's the 50-day anniversary of the Passover miracle, came the miracle at Mount Sinai. In any event, what this has to do with is in the midst of all that, there was a battle, terrible battle, and you probably know the story, was Moses was commanding the people, even though he was old, and when he would raise his arms, the people couldn't lose. They were fighting Amalek, who is in the Bible, the most vicious opponent and would-be killer, destroyer of the Jewish people. And when he would raise his arms, the Jewish people would be winning. They would survive. They would succeed against Amalek. But when he had to lower his arms because he was tired, so Joshua came and raised one arm, and another leader of the people raised another arm. They held Moses' arms up. So what's the whole big deal about raising arms? Because you look up, you don't look down. You look up to see God's providence, his role, and to look up toward inspiration and toward bettering yourself. And that was the key to victory. And then when it comes to this idea of building something of lasting worth, what did the Jewish people carry with them through the wilderness for 40 years? The Ark of the Covenant. And they built the tabernacle, the Mishkan, in the wilderness. And the idea is that every Passover ceremony that you go through, it says, you should treat tonight as if you yourself were liberated from Egypt. And I want to conclude by saying, I can only hope that our movie is going to help Americans treat themselves as if they lived through the miracle of America's founding. Because when you look at this, and it's one of the most astonishing things that you can think of and take away, is if someone was transported from, say, 1600 to today, to 2025, and he was to look at the world, of course, he'd be amazed at all of the inventions and the tall buildings, but in terms of the way that countries are situated, you'd still have France being convinced that it was better than any place else and snooty. You would still have Russia, which is a colossal mess and very imperialistic. You would have an Arab world that spends a lot of time killing each other. You would have basically the same thing, but the one thing no one ever could have appreciated or predicted was that the most powerful and influential and successful country in the world would be in North America. This was very lightly populated. There were no giant cities, there were no, and here it is, North America. This is not an accident. This is a blessing. And to try to make people aware of that blessing in this holy season, with Good Friday coming up and Easter and the Passover holiday that we're going to be celebrating, may I wish everybody a year of unity, of uplift, and of building structures and culture with lasting worth for this greatest nation on God's green earth. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, we have a good amount of time. 15 minutes for Q&A. So if you have a question, raise your hand and I'll come over.
Terrific.
With the mic.
Yes.
Oh, here we go.
Michael, it seems like the last 10 years or longer, Hollywood has rediscovered religious films or Christian films. The question is, do they really get it, why people are going, or have they just run the numbers?
No, I think a lot of the people who are making these films are believers, are people who are very sincere about it and willing to take great risks. And by the way, there is a controversial person, he was just in the news recently for further controversy, named Mel Gibson, who put a great deal of his own money, money of friends, into making The Passion. He has a new film called The Resurrection, which is obviously the sequel. But the fact is, that's one of the most profitable movies ever made. Mel Gibson made over $1 billion on The Passion, and he did it not because he needed to make money or wanted to make money. He did it because he had a genuine passion as a genuine believer. And again, I'm not saying he is the perfect role model in any way. He has a lot of difficulties and challenges. But I do think that people like John Irwin, who I quoted here about the longing, he also cites, and I owe this to John Irwin, and I'll share this with you. He respects someone named Vince Gilligan, who is the creator of Breaking Bad, which was on AMC, who got an award from the Writers Guild of America. And in getting the Writers Guild Award, he said, "For decades, we made our villains too sexy. Maybe what the world needs now are some good, old-fashioned, greatest generation types," that's you, Jefferson Smith, "who give more than they take, who think that kindness, tolerance, and sacrifice are not strictly for chumps." Yes, so I think there is a sincere transformation, and also people are finding each other and finding that community, the kind of unity that I was talking about around the Seder table, because there are various organizations in Hollywood, to an extent that there never used to be, of people who get together to observe holidays, to pray together, to basically form a religious community in a place that hasn't seemed particularly hospitable to that idea for many, many years. And by the way, this is a quote from Jefferson Smith, the character, in the middle of his filibuster to the Senate, which did not break the record, that they made such a Cory Booker, 25 minutes, 25 hours and 8 minutes, yeah. In any event, what Jefferson Smith said in the midst of his filibuster is, "I wouldn't give you 2 cents for all your fancy rules if behind them they didn't have a little bit of plain, ordinary, everyday kindness and a little looking out for the other fella, too." Which is, there's another segment from the movie, I don't think it's in one of those clips that you were going to be shown, but where Jefferson Smith is building to a crescendo in his filibuster, and he says, "And so I'm telling you right here, right now, either I'm dead or I'm dead crazy or I'm right." And then another character who's sitting in the Senate chamber says, "Senator, do you mind if we take a vote on that?" Which is one of the great moments from the film. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
So Mel Gibson's success with his movies is counterintuitive to what's going on with anti-Semitism, particularly on college campuses.
Yeah, I know Mel, and do I believe he is personally an anti-Semite? No, I believe he's a drunk. And he will tell you that too. He's been going to AA for a long time. And the whole experience he had with the Malibu police officer was the only member of the Malibu Police Department who was Jewish. And he had arrested Mel twice before on DUI stuff, and he was arresting him a third time. And Mel exploded with vile anti-Semitism for which there is no excuse. He's tried to make up for it. At one point, he was talking about doing a movie about the Maccabees, the story of Hanukkah. And do I believe that Mel is tormented? He has this problem with the Trump administration right now. It just worked out that he could get his gun rights back because he had a violent felony to which he ended up pleading guilty involving his girlfriend. So I don't believe that Mel is at the...
I wasn't suggesting by any means that Mel was anti-Semitic.
Right.
I'm just saying the movie had one way of telling what's going on, and the anti-Semitism all over the universities is a whole other story.
Correct. No, and what is fascinating about this is that in the past, did you hear that? What he was saying? He was saying that what's going on in the universities is very different from the idea that there are people who are picking up religious commitment in Hollywood. And this shows something that has changed in America very dramatically. When I was a little boy, which is back in the 50s, my mother and father too, to some extent, had the sense that if there was any anti-Semitism, anything we had to be worried about, it was deeply religious Christian people. And part of this comes from a kindergarten teacher who had the kids coloring in Christmas nativity scenes where they would put halos. And again, to talk about arguing about this now all these years later, it has changed. I think that most Jewish people recognize today that the biggest allies in fighting anti-Semitism and in fighting on behalf of the state of Israel and its right to exist and to flourish and to be secure, our biggest allies are evangelical Christians and a whole bunch of traditional Catholics. And again, that changed very dramatically. It changed starting with Pope John the 23rd and Vatican II. And I think that's one of those incalculably good things where believers today can cross that line. The anti-Semitism is coming from a lot of foreign students, as we know, a lot of whom are having visa problems right now. And in many cases, deserved visa problems. But it is not coming from people who are trying to make religious programming like the House of David, which is very sympathetic to the traditional biblical Jewish perspective of David HaMelech, of David the King. Okay, last question. Final question. Just one more word. I hope everybody will join us at the Guthrie Theater tonight at 7:30? 7:15, okay. And we will have myself and Ralph, who is one of the producers of the film, answering questions afterward. And I am very eager to see it. They have just upgraded the sound and the camera work. And I do say, with all due modesty, I think people will be deeply moved, surprised, and I hope even a little bit inspired by this American miracle. The story of how this came together is also its own American miracle story, but we will get to that, and I hope to see everybody tonight to see this film that I hope can make its own contribution to those three changes that I believe are very important for our culture. Thank you, and have a wonderful time.